I drained my retirement account to pay off my daughter's $100,000 student loan, praying she'd finally become a responsible adult. Then I found her children alone and sick after she'd been out all night. When I confronted her, she called me an ignorant old woman. She thought she had already secured my money for her future. She didn't realize my real future and my entire fortune was about to be legally tied to the very children she neglected. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Josephine King, and at 68 my life had become a long, quiet prayer. A prayer for my daughter Gabrielle. For 35 years I had worked as a hospital administrator, a world of crisp uniforms, tight budgets, and the quiet, steady competence required to manage chaos. I had raised Gabrielle on my own after my husband passed, and I had prided myself on my ability to provide, to be the unshakable foundation of her world. But the woman my daughter had become was a stranger to me, a whirlwind of reckless spending and shallow ambitions, married to a man, Damon, who seemed to applaud her every foolish impulse. Their life was a glittering facade, a carefully curated social media performance of weekend getaways, designer handbags, and trendy restaurant dinners, all propped up by a mountain of debt that was both terrifying and, to them, seemingly irrelevant. For years I had tried to advise them, my words of caution about saving, about responsibility, about living within their means, met with the same patronizing smiles and dismissive waves of the hand. "Oh, Mama, you just don't understand modern finances," Gabrielle would say. "You have to project success to attract success." I understood finances all too well. I understood the language of red ink and overdue notices. And I understood that my daughter and her husband were drowning. The final, desperate plea came in the form of her student loan debt. It was the one concrete, massive anchor dragging her down, a relic from the master's degree I had been so proud of her for achieving. It was, she convinced me, the one thing holding her back from true adulthood, from financial responsibility. "If I could just get out from under this loan, Mama," she'd wept on the phone one night after another tearful call about a maxed-out credit card. "It's crippling. We could finally breathe, finally save, finally be the responsible adults you always wanted us to be." It was a brilliant piece of manipulation, aimed directly at my deepest desire, to see my daughter secure and happy. I had my own nest egg, a substantial retirement fund I had meticulously built over 40 years of hard work, a fund meant to ensure my own quiet, comfortable old age. It was my security, my independence. Against every pragmatic instinct in my body, I made a decision. I would make one final, massive sacrifice. I would take the bulk of my retirement savings, the fortress I had built for my own future, and use it to pay off her entire $100,000 student loan. It would be my last bailout, my ultimate gift, a clean slate from which she could finally, I prayed, build a responsible life. The day I made the transfer, sitting at my small kitchen table, the silence in my apartment was deafening. I looked at the confirmation on my computer screen, the six-figure sum vanishing from my account, and I felt a terrifying, hollow emptiness. But I pushed it down, replacing it with a fragile, desperate hope. This would be it. This would be the turning point. This grand gesture of a mother's love would finally be the thing that helped my daughter grow up. My prayer now was that my investment in her future wouldn't leave my own in ruins. For a few brief, beautiful weeks, it seemed my desperate gamble might have paid off. Gabrielle was effusive in her gratitude, her phone calls suddenly full of warmth and loving promises. "You've given me a new life, Mama," she'd gushed. "A real fresh start. Things are going to be different now, I swear it." She and Damon even had me over for dinner, a rare occasion where they toasted my generosity and spoke of their new responsible financial plans. The fragile hope in my heart began to tentatively unfurl. But a house built on a rotten foundation cannot stand for long, no matter how beautifully it is decorated. The new life looked remarkably like the old one, only now it was supercharged, untethered from the monthly anchor of her student loan payment. The designer shopping bags began to reappear. The social media posts shifted from grateful for new beginnings to celebrating life at another ridiculously expensive new restaurant. The old, familiar dread began to coil in my stomach. I had not given her a fresh start. I had simply cleared the runway for her to take off into an even higher altitude of recklessness. The breaking point, the moment my last illusion shattered, came on a Thursday night in October. It began with a frantic call, not from Gabrielle but from my 10-year-old grandson Leo. His voice was a small, terrified whisper. "Grandma? It's me," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Maya's sick. She's really hot and she keeps crying. And Mommy and Daddy aren't home." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean they aren't home, baby? Where are they?" "They went to a party," he whispered. "A long time ago. They said they'd be back after our bedtime. But Maya woke up crying and they're not here, and the phone in their room just rings and rings." I didn't hesitate. "You stay on the phone with me, Leo. I'm coming right now." I threw on my coat, my hands shaking so badly I could barely find the keys to my old car. The 30-minute drive to their house felt like an eternity, my grandson's scared, quiet voice on the speakerphone my only guide. When I arrived, the house was dark, save for the faint glow of a television in the living room. Leo let me in, his small face pale with a worry no 10-year-old should ever have to carry. His little sister Maya, just 7, was flushed with fever, her small body trembling under a thin blanket on the sofa. The rest of their house was a testament to their evening's priorities. The kitchen was a disaster, takeout containers from a fancy restaurant strewn across the counter. In the living room, on their glass coffee table, nestled amongst the expensive art books, was a small mirror with a faint white residue on it and a rolled-up dollar bill. My heart seized. I knew what it was. My daughter, my son-in-law were not just at a party. Their recklessness had taken a darker, more dangerous turn. I spent the rest of that long, terrifying night caring for my grandchildren. I coaxed aspirin and water into a feverish Maya. I held Leo while he cried, not for his parents but out of fear for his sister. I sat in their cold, silent, messy house, a house my money had indirectly helped to maintain, and I felt a rage so profound, so absolute, it was almost calming. This was not just irresponsibility anymore. This was endangerment. This was neglect of the highest, most unforgivable order. They finally strolled in at 4 o'clock in the morning, their laughter echoing loudly in the quiet street before they even opened the door. They were drunk, their eyes glassy, their clothes rumpled. They stopped short when they saw me sitting in the living room armchair, a sleeping Maya on the sofa beside me, a watchful Leo at my feet. "Mom," Gabrielle said, her voice a surprised, slurred whisper. "What are you doing here?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. My voice, when I spoke, was as cold and as quiet as the grave. "Your daughter has a fever of 103. Your son was terrified. You left them alone. Where were you, Gabrielle?" Her face, which had been slack with intoxication, hardened into a defensive sneer. "We were at a work function. It was important. You can't just show up at my house in the middle of the night." "Your house," I repeated, standing slowly, every joint in my body aching with a weariness that had nothing to do with age. "Your house, that you pay for with the life you have because of the sacrifices I made. You left your sick child alone to go to a party." Damon stepped forward then, his own face a mask of belligerent anger. "It was one night, Josephine. They're fine. You're being hysterical." That's when Gabrielle, cornered, resentful, and utterly devoid of remorse, unleashed her most vicious weapon. "Oh my God, you are so dramatic," she shrieked, her voice rising. "This is why we can't stand having you around. Who are you to lecture me about parenting? You were never even here. You were always working. You think paying for my degree makes you a good mother? You were just an old woman who wrote checks. You are an ignorant old woman who never even went to college. You know nothing about my life, my pressures, my world." The words, so full of contempt, so dripping with ingratitude, struck me with the force of a physical blow. After everything. After the years of sacrifice. After the $100,000. After rushing to her children's side in the middle of the night. I was ignorant. I knew nothing. I looked at my daughter, at her beautiful, cruel face, and I saw a stranger, a monster of my own making perhaps. The last shred of my hope for her, my love for the woman she had become, died in that moment. "You are right about one thing, Gabrielle," I said, my voice quiet, but now imbued with a new, terrifying authority. "I don't know anything about your world, and I no longer wish to. Get out of my sight." She scoffed, but something in my eyes must have frightened her, because she grabbed Damon's arm and they retreated up the stairs, leaving me alone with their sleeping, vulnerable children. The battle line had been drawn. And she had just handed me my cause, not my own broken heart, but the safety and future of the two innocent lives she had so carelessly, so recklessly abandoned. The morning after their reckless night out, the house was thick with a toxic unspoken truce. Gabrielle and Damon tiptoed around me, their faces sullen, their usual arrogance replaced by a wary, resentful silence. They were angry not with themselves for their appalling neglect, but with me for having been there to witness it. I ignored them, my entire focus on Leo and Maya. I made them a proper breakfast, took their temperatures, my old hospital administrator skills kicking in with a quiet, efficient calm. I was no longer their grieving, easily manipulated mother. I was a protector, and these children were now under my care. When Gabrielle finally tried to broach the subject, her voice a mixture of defiance and a weak attempt at justification, I held up a hand, silencing her. "We have nothing to discuss, Gabrielle," I said, my voice as cold as the tile beneath my feet. "My only concern right now is the well-being of these children, who you and your husband saw fit to abandon while they were sick and scared." Her face flushed with anger. "We did not abandon them. We were at a networking event. For our future. Something you with your simple little life wouldn't understand. That was it. The final confirmation. My life, my sacrifices were simple. Her partying was their future. My love for my grandchildren was a nuisance. Her neglect was a necessity of her oh-so-important life. My heart, which had been shattered just hours before, now felt strangely calm, forged into something hard and unyielding by the fire of her profound, unrepentant selfishness. The years of my making excuses for her, of hoping she would grow up, of pouring my love and my life savings into the black hole of her entitlement, it was all over. It was no longer about trying to save my daughter from herself. It was now, with absolute, terrifying clarity, about saving my grandchildren from their own mother. I knew then what I had to do. The thought of my life savings, the very inheritance that should one day benefit Leo and Maya, being squandered on Gabrielle and Damon's reckless, potentially illegal lifestyle, was an unbearable prospect. They had proven themselves to be not just irresponsible but dangerous. They could not be trusted with their own children, let alone with a significant financial legacy. I had to protect my grandchildren. I had to protect my legacy. And to do that, I had to take decisive legal action. The first step was to leave that house. I could not plot my war from within their territory. I called my sister Clara, who lived 2 towns over. I told her there had been a family emergency, that I needed to come and stay with her for a while, and that I needed to bring the children. She, thank God, didn't ask too many questions, just said, "Come on home, Josephine. The kettle's on." I packed a small bag for myself and for each of the children, my movements swift and purposeful. When Gabrielle, seeing my actions, asked with a sneer, "What are you doing, Mama?" "Running away." I just looked her dead in the eye. "No, Gabrielle," I said coolly. "I'm not running away. I am advancing in a different direction. You will be hearing from my lawyer." Her smirk faltered, a flicker of genuine alarm in her eyes for the first time. Your lawyer? What are you talking about?" "You, my dear, with your master's degree will find out soon enough," I replied, a small, bitter smile on my lips. At Clara's house, surrounded by her quiet, unwavering support, I began my campaign. I was no longer a heartbroken mother. I was a strategist, a plaintiff. I thought about the insult she had hurled at me, the one designed to cut the deepest. "You're just an ignorant old woman who never even went to college." She had used my lack of a formal degree as a weapon to belittle me, to assert her superiority. She was about to learn that there are many kinds of education, and a lifetime of hard work, common sense, and quiet observation had given me a wisdom that trumped any degree she had bought with my money. My mind, the one she thought was so simple, began to work with a cold, clear precision. I needed to protect my assets. I needed to protect my grandchildren. The solution was not just to rewrite my will. That was a passive, posthumous act. I needed something more immediate, more powerful, more permanent. I needed to build a fortress, a legal and financial fortress around my grandchildren, one so strong that their own mother's reckless greed could never breach its walls. I remembered a conversation I'd had with my late husband years ago, about a friend of his who had set up a special kind of trust for his wayward son. A spendthrift trust, he'd called it. A way to provide for an heir without ever giving them direct control of the capital. The idea took root and grew. This would be my masterpiece of maternal protection, my final act of love for Leo and Maya, and my final devastating lesson for Gabrielle. She had called me ignorant. She was about to get a masterclass in estate planning. The ignorant old woman was going to build an ironclad trust. And my daughter, with all her fancy education, was about to find herself on the outside, looking in permanently. The day after I arrived at my sister Clara's house, my grandchildren safely playing in her quiet backyard, I sat at her kitchen table with a notepad and my old, battered address book. My fury had cooled into a focused, deliberate calm. The emotional battle was over. The strategic one was just beginning. I knew I needed the best legal mind I could find, someone who specialized not just in wills, but in complex, ironclad trusts, someone who would understand the gravity of my situation. I found the number for Arthur Sterling, the same estate lawyer my late husband and I had used years ago to draft our simple original will. He was a man of integrity, sharp as a tack, and he knew our family's history. When I explained the situation to him over the phone, his initial tone of warm condolence quickly shifted to one of grave professional concern. I told him everything: my paying off of Gabrielle's $100,000 student loan, her subsequent cruel dismissal of me, her and Damon's reckless lifestyle, the neglect of their children, and finally, her vicious tirade where she had called me an ignorant old woman. "Arthur," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "my daughter and her husband have proven themselves to be profoundly irresponsible, not just with money, but with the well-being of their own children. I can no longer, in good conscience, plan to leave my estate to her. It would be like handing a lit match to a pyromaniac in a house full of gasoline. My primary concern now is the future of my grandchildren Leo and Maya." I then laid out my idea, the one that had been solidifying in my mind: an ironclad spendthrift trust. Arthur was silent for a moment, absorbing the details. "Josephine," he said finally, his voice full of a grim respect, "this is a very powerful and wise course of action. A professionally managed trust would ensure that your assets are preserved and used solely for the benefit of your grandchildren, for their education, their health, their future, in a way that their parents could never touch or influence. It is the strongest legal protection you can give them." "That is exactly what I want," I confirmed. "I want a fortress. I want every T crossed, every loophole closed. I want Gabrielle and Damon to have absolutely no access, no control, no say ever." "Consider it done," he said. Over the next few weeks, Arthur and his team worked with a quiet, ruthless efficiency. We communicated by phone and secure email, my sister Clara's house my new command center. The legal maneuvering was complex, but my years as a hospital administrator, dealing with complex billing and insurance paperwork, had given me a surprisingly good head for it. First, we restructured my entire estate. My house, my savings, my investment portfolio. Everything was legally designated to be transferred into the King Jones Grandchildren's Trust upon my death. We named a professional third-party corporate trustee, a respected bank that would manage the funds with cold, impartial prudence, ensuring the money was used only for the express benefit of Leo and Maya as outlined in the trust documents. Then came the most crucial part, the part that would serve as my final devastating lesson to my daughter. Arthur drafted a formal notification letter to be sent to Gabrielle and Damon. It was a masterpiece of legal understatement. It did not mention my anger, their cruelty, or their neglect. It simply, factually, informed them that I had undertaken a comprehensive review and restructuring of my estate plan to better provide for the long-term educational and wellness needs of my grandchildren. It stated that a new, professionally managed trust had been established for this purpose, and that, as a matter of legal notification to potential heirs, a summary of the new arrangement was enclosed. The summary was the true weapon. It clearly, in unambiguous legal language, outlined the structure of the trust. It named Leo and Maya as the sole beneficiaries. And then, it included the clause that was the heart of my entire strategy, the clause Arthur had drafted with a certain grim satisfaction. The parents of the beneficiaries, Gabrielle King Jones and Damon Jones, are hereby explicitly and irrevocably excluded from acting as trustees, co-trustees, or having any authority, access, or discretionary power over the funds within this trust for any reason whatsoever. It was a legal masterstroke. They were not just disinherited, they were declared untrustworthy, unfit to even manage the funds meant for their own children. It was a quiet, devastating indictment of their character, codified in a legally binding document. The day Arthur sent that letter via registered mail, I felt a strange sense of calm. The trap was set. The fortress was built. All that was left was for them to walk into it. I knew the explosion would be immense. But for the first time in a very long time I was not afraid. I was ready. I had taken my pain, my humiliation, and my lifelong savings, and I had forged them into a shield that would protect my grandchildren long after I was gone. My ignorant old self, it turned out, knew a thing or two about building a legacy. The silence after Arthur sent the letter lasted for exactly 48 hours. It was a tense, charged silence, the kind that precedes a storm. Then on a Tuesday afternoon my phone rang. It was Gabrielle, her voice a strangled, high-pitched screech of disbelief and fury. "Mama, what have you done? What is this? This insulting letter from your lawyer. A trust? For the kids? What about me? What about us?" I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times. I did not engage. I did not argue. "Gabrielle," I said, my voice calm and cool, "the letter is quite self-explanatory. I have made new arrangements for my estate to ensure the children are taken care of. I have nothing further to discuss on the phone." "Nothing further to discuss?" she shrieked. "You have disinherited your own daughter. You have cut me off. We are coming over. Now." She hung up before I could reply. I sat in my armchair, my heart a steady rhythmic drum, and waited. An hour later their expensive SUV screeched to a halt in my driveway. Gabrielle and Damon stormed up to my front door, their faces thunderous. I met them at the door, my expression placid, unreadable. They pushed past me into my living room, Gabrielle waving the lawyer's letter in her hand like a weapon. "Explain this, Mother," she demanded, her voice shaking with rage. "Explain how you could do this to your own flesh and blood after everything we've been through." "I believe," I said, sitting down calmly, gesturing to the sofa opposite me, "that is exactly what I am doing. I am protecting my flesh and blood, Leo and Maya, from what I have watched you both go through. A life of financial irresponsibility, recklessness, and profound neglect of your own children." Damon, her husband, finally spoke, his voice a low sneer. "So that's it? You're going to punish us because we like to enjoy life a little? Because we don't pinch pennies like you did?" "I pinched pennies, Damon," I replied, my voice like ice, "so that your wife could have a $100,000 education she now uses to call her own mother ignorant. I pinched pennies so that my grandchildren would have a roof over their heads, a roof their own parents seem to forget exists when they decide to go out partying all night, leaving their 6-7-year-old in the care of her 10-year-old brother." Gabrielle flinched, the color draining from her face. I had never mentioned the night I'd rushed over, had never thrown it in her face until now. "That was a one-time thing," she stammered. "Leo overreacted." "Did he?" I asked softly. "Or was it the culmination of a pattern of neglect and selfishness that I have watched for years? The one-time loan I paid off for you, the constant emergencies, the lavish lifestyle you live while being drowning in debt." I leaned forward, my gaze meeting my daughter's directly. "You came to me after I paid off your loans and you humiliated me. You called me ignorant. You made it clear that my sacrifices meant nothing to you, that I was nothing more than an obstacle, a resource to be used and then discarded. You taught me a very valuable lesson that day, Gabrielle. You taught me that you cannot be trusted. Not with money, not with responsibility, and certainly not with the future of my grandchildren. So you're just cutting me off?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. "Leaving me with nothing?" "On the contrary," I said, picking up the thick, professionally bound document Arthur had prepared for me, a summary of the new trust. I slid it across the coffee table towards them. "I am leaving you with a great deal. I am leaving you with the full responsibility for your own lives, your own debts, your own choices for the very first time. No more safety net. No more bailouts from your ignorant old mother." They stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. They could see the legalese, the official seals, the name of the powerful corporate trustee. They could see the fortress I had built, a fortress designed specifically to keep them out. "The trust," I explained calmly, "is for Leo and Maya. For their education, their health, their first homes. It is ironclad. You are named in it only once," I added, a small, cold smile touching my lips, "in the clause that explicitly forbids you from ever accessing or managing a single penny of it." Gabrielle's face crumpled. Damon just stared, his mouth agape, the full, catastrophic weight of his wife's arrogance and his own complicity finally crashing down on him. Their future, the one they had assumed would be cushioned by my life savings, had just vanished. How could you do this to me? Gabrielle finally wept, her tears of rage now turning to tears of genuine, pathetic self-pity. I'm your daughter. Yes, I said, standing up, the conversation over. You are. And as your mother, I am giving you the final, most important lesson of all. Actions have consequences. You chose to value my money over my love. Now you will have neither. I walked to the front door and held it open. I believe this inheritance discussion is concluded, I said quietly. They had come to claim their future. They left having been completely, utterly, and legally disowned. The departure of Gabrielle and Damon from my home that day felt like the closing of a heavy iron door on a lifetime of misplaced hope. They left not with the swagger of their usual entitlement, but with the stunned, stumbling gait of people who had just been comprehensively outmaneuvered, their entire future dismantled before their very eyes. The silence they left behind was not the lonely, aching silence I had grown used to. It was a clean, peaceful silence, the sound of my life finally, truly becoming my own again. The weeks that followed were a quiet testament to the power of the fortress I had built. Their initial shock, I heard through the family grapevine, morphed into a furious, impotent rage. They consulted lawyers of their own, of course. They sought to challenge the trust, to contest my will before I was even gone, to find some loophole, some way to claw back the inheritance they so firmly believed was their due. But Arthur Sterling had done his work with the meticulous skill of a master craftsman. The trust was legally unassailable. My competency was beyond question. My reasons for establishing the trust clearly documented. Their own history of financial recklessness, which Arthur's team had quietly compiled, stood in stark contrast to my lifetime of prudent management. Their legal challenges went nowhere, amounting to nothing more than a series of expensive, angry letters that served only to drain their own dwindling resources. Without my financial safety net, their lavish lifestyle began to crumble with a speed that was almost predictable. The expensive car was repossessed. The country club membership was cancelled. They were forced to downsize, to sell their oversized house in the suburbs, and move into a small rental apartment, a place Gabrielle likely found deeply, publicly humiliating. They were, for the first time in their adult lives, forced to live within the means of their own making, and they found those means wanting. I did not gloat. I did not take pleasure in their downfall. I simply observed it from a quiet, dignified distance, a sense of somber justice my only companion. My revenge was not in their ruin, but in the security of my grandchildren's future. I made it a point to see Leo and Maya regularly on my own terms. I would pick them up from school, take them to the park, to museums, to the library. I filled their lives with the quiet, steady, unconditional love and attention their parents were too self-absorbed to provide. I never spoke ill of Gabrielle or Damon to them. They were still their parents, and my battle was not with the children's love, but with their parents' character. But the children, especially Leo, were old enough to understand the shift. They saw their parents' stress, their reduced circumstances, and they saw their grandmother, who had once been a peripheral, ignorant figure, now as a source of strength, stability, and quiet joy. One afternoon, as I was helping Leo with his history homework, he looked up at me, his young face serious. "Grandma," he said, "Mom and Dad are fighting a lot. About money. They said you cut them off." I looked at my grandson, at his intelligent, questioning eyes, and I knew he deserved a measure of the truth. "Leo," I said softly, "sometimes when people make very bad choices they have to face the consequences. Your mother and father, they made some choices that hurt me very deeply. And so, I had to make some choices of my own to protect myself and to protect you and your sister's future." I paused. "The money my husband, your grandpa, and I saved our entire lives for, it is safe. It is for you. For your education, for your future. It will be there for you when you need it. That is my promise." He nodded slowly, a deep understanding dawning in his young eyes. "Because you love us," he said, a simple statement of fact. "Yes, baby," I said, my heart aching with a fierce, protective love. "Because I love you." That was my final victory. Not the legal documents, not the financial ruin of my daughter and her husband, but this moment. The knowledge that my grandchildren would be safe, that their future was secure, protected from the recklessness of their own parents. The knowledge that my life's work, my husband's legacy, would be a blessing to them, not a prize for their parents to squander. I had been called ignorant, a fool, a woman who knew nothing of the modern world. But I had used my quiet, old-fashioned wisdom to enact a perfect, modern justice. I had lost a daughter, yes, and that was a sorrow I would carry to my grave. But I had saved my grandchildren. I had secured my true legacy. And in the quiet peace of my own home, that felt like the most profound, most satisfying victory of all.